Well, we might as well get started. My name's Dale Luthringer. I'm the Environmental Education Specialist here at Cook Forest. And we're going to spend the next hour and a half or so, 2 hours, for those of you who are diehards, is going through a number of historical tools back in the mid to late 1800s, or even earlier, really, that the lumbermen in the area would have used, and some of the carpentry tools that some of the fellows would have used to. First, you got to take the log down, then you have to move the log to a certain place. Then if you have to make your house, you got to manipulate that log, turn that log down into something that you can actually use. So there's a different tool for every job. We're going to go through a lot of tools. We're also going to go through some of the local history here that kind of really spreads out across a lot of Pennsylvania in the Northeast in terms of lumber history. And I'd like to take a short walk and down towards the end of this field and show you where the old one of the old lumber mills were and where an old splash dam was. And if any of you do any type of canoe trips on the Clarion River or Allegheny River, or you do hikes up and down a lot of these side valleys, if you have your eyes open and you know what to look for, you can still see remnants of the lumber boom days 120, 150, almost 200 years ago. The evidence is still out there. How many of you canoed on the Clarion River before? Okay. Anybody go out there this weekend? Okay. There's certain places, even if you go at the standard 4-mile launch as you're coming down the river, if you keep your eyes open, you can still see some of the remnants of the logging history 150 or so years ago. Still there. One of the best examples of that is if you keep your eyes open across from the river cabins, where the playground is down there along the river. In that section of the river, if you look across, there's a little island out there on the other side of the river, and that is not a natural island, that's a man-made island. And it used to be an old mill of sorts. I'm not sure if it was a grist mill or a lumber mill. It was probably more likely a type of a lumber mill of sorts. But one of the main tools, if you were going to harvest trees, you needed to take the trees down, and they didn't have chainsaws back then. All right, the main tool was a crosscut saw. All right, this is a 2-man crosscut. And here's a real tough question. Why do you think they call it a 2-man crosscut saw? What do you think?
It needs 2 people?
That's right, it needs 2 people. You got a handle on each side. One guy can operate it, but it's miserable. All right, this tool is best used by 2 people. All right, when you go to use this, you need to use a lot of cooperation. When we get towards the end of the program, we'll let some of you test this out and see how good you are. Okay, but the key to working this tool is you just pull. All right, you're not going to help the other person by pushing. If you push, then you bend the saw, because when you bend the saw like that, then it binds up and you're not going to go anywhere. Okay, but crosscut saws had different types of teeth on them. If you look, these 2 teeth that I'm pointing at right here, they kind of look like like little triangles almost. Okay, these types of teeth are what we call cutters, or I'm sorry, they call rakers. And these are the type of teeth that actually take the sawdust out of the cut. And out of that cut we call kerf. These teeth, these 2 here that I'm pointing at here, look kind of like shark teeth. These 2 are called the rakers. These are, you got it messed up, these are called the cutters. Right? These are the ones that actually cut the wood. The shark-looking teeth are the cutters. The triangular kind of ones are the rakers. Okay? And there are different combinations of these types of teeth. Okay? This saw has 2 cutters to 1 raker. 2 to 1. 2 to 1. Others would have 3 to 1. Some might just have all cutters. Okay? So there might be 3 to 2. Alright? A lot of it depending on what kind of wood you were working on. Hardwood, softwood. And but you had to keep these very sharp. And if you take a closer look here at the end of the program, to sharpen these takes a good bit of skill. Alright? And you had to keep these nice and sharp. If this was a dull saw, you're not going to get any serious work done. Okay? The saw's going to bind up. And if you look closely, just on one of these cutters, there's 2 different angles that you have to sharpen on this one tooth. And on the rakers, you have to sharpen these. And there's 2 angles on each raker. All right? You don't want one tooth higher than the other tooth. And if you were to lay this saw out on the ground with a bunch of other these saws, this is kind of like if you look at the top, well, let's put it this way. You see how straight the bottom part of this saw is? That's a straight line. Okay? If you look at the top of the saw, it's kind of got an arc to it. All right? You had to keep this arc. If you had this straight part of the saw that you were cutting with, if all the teeth were the same height, it wouldn't work very well. You had this certain type of arcs. It was a very special way that you need to sharpen these. Not many people know how to do that these days. Okay? Anyway, this is called a two-man crosscut saw. And if we were to harvest trees, one of the first types of trees they were going to harvest over here at Cook Forest were big, tall. When we look at trees in Cook Forest, if you were to walk this trail here behind me that goes up to this ridge line, about halfway up this ridge, you get into a section of forest that hasn't been logged before. And we're looking at many trees that are easily two times as large as this one, that are pushing 350 or so years old. Okay? If you haven't walked the Longfellow Trail, if you can walk 300 yards up a slate grade, you'll be right where the big old white pines start to grow. Now, if we look behind me over here, here's a decent sized hemlock. Right here. Any idea on how old anybody thinks this tree is?
200?
200, a little older than 200. What do you think? 250? Probably 250-ish, maybe 275. That one, when we cored that back in 97, we had 226. We had about another 6-8 inches to go before we would have got to the center. So back then it was probably pretty close to 250, if not a little bit more. All right? So that very well could be a 250-year-old tree, if not close to 275. Cook Forest is loaded with this size class of hemlock trees. If you're walking in a Pennsylvania forest and it has hemlocks of this stature, it's almost guaranteed you're in an old growth forest. Okay? Now that same tree growing out in the field could grow faster and might be 100 years old and reach that size. But back in the woods, trees take a good bit longer to get the girth. But back in the woods, they're going to grow pretty tall. And that's what we were looking for back then. If we were harvesting white pine, they were the big money tree initially when they first started logging, because they were often prized as lumber for the shipbuilding industry. And the sawyers would go back in the woods and they'd look up at a pine. They'd be looking for a specific type of a pine that had just the right bend to it. And they'd try and use those if they could to build ship masts. You had to have the right bend. It wasn't always a particularly straight tree. When you go to tie those lines up on that sailing ship, the bend on that tree will help you tighten those specific lines. So they weren't going for just any tree if you were going to go for the shipbuilding industry. But when you went to cut this tree down, they just didn't hand anybody the old saw and say, here, go ahead and cut the tree down. All right, anybody can cut a tree down, but not everybody can cut it down and have it remain in one nice usable piece, or lay it down where it needs to go down. If I don't plan where this is going to land, I might lay it right across that cabin, or I might lay it right across somebody's cars. All right, not quite that high to hit the cars, but you need to place it where you want it. And so oftentimes we wanted that log in one straight piece, and if the terrain it was going to land on was maybe really rocky or boulders, we might cut smaller trees down underneath of it to kind of act like a little mattress. So when that one came down, it would have that cushion to stay in one piece. Because if it came down and splintered into 3 or 4 separate logs, you'd probably just ruin that log. Not a whole lot you're going to salvage out of that. Okay? So it took a lot of skill to cut these trees down. And that's what we use this tool for. Now we got that down, we would need to cut that log up in lengths. Okay? Maybe 16 foot, however length that you wanted. And as soon as that log was down, there'd be a couple of guys with crosscut saws that would come through. One guy would be walking along the log, he'd go 16 feet, and he'd say, mark it. And those 2 guys with the crosscut saw, they'd start sawing that log. You go another 16 feet, mark it. Another 16 feet, mark it. By the time he probably got 3 or 4 lengths out, these guys were done on that first cut and were already working on the second cut. There's a lot of guys out there working, and there wasn't a whole lot of standing around.